Hi, I'm Heather. Welcome to class. Today we're going to do a short sequence of poses that will lengthen the adductor muscles, the inner thighs, or sometimes we refer to them as the groins. And before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, to like, share, and comment. All these actions contribute to YouTube's algorithm sharing this content with more people who are searching for inspiration for their yoga practice. Before we begin, if you find this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. We're going to start on the knees, stretching forward in Adho Mukha Virasana, the downward facing hero pose. Big toes touch, knees apart. The knees, initially for this pose, are contained within the width of the mat. But as we progress, we'll take the knees wider and wider to bring in a stretch to the inner thighs. Many of us may not feel that stretch when we've got the knees contained within the mat, but as I said, we'll get there. We'll take the knees wide in a moment. But for now, just create the shape of the pose, big toes touching, knees apart, but contain the knees within the boundary of your mat. Stretch the arms forward, broaden the palms as you spread the fingers. Let the head settle down. Whether it touches the floor or not, it may have to do with your flexion in the knees, your flexion in the hips, your mobility in the shoulders. Don't stress about bringing the head to touch the floor if you can't manage that. But push into the hands, move the hips back and down, buttocks to heels. If you do struggle with the knees in a pose like this, you may need to put a blanket or a bolster between the heels and the buttocks, or navigate the pose in a different way. Perhaps you need to sit on a chair and reach forward to another chair. Now we come up and we take the knees wider. Can you keep the big toes touching and spread the knees as wide as you can? Take them out onto the floor on either sides of your mat. Still, as I said, big toes touching, buttocks back to the heels, and then stretch forward. And initially you might find coming onto the forearms is helpful, just to keep the hips back and down. If we stretch the arms forward, sometimes the hips will want to lift and go forward with the arms. So stay on the forearms for a few breaths. Keep the buttocks back to the heels as much as you can. And then perhaps you can reach forward without lifting the buttocks. The buttocks stay back to the heels. The chest can come forward and down. But push into the hands to keep the hips moving back. Breathe smoothly, slowly, steadily. And then we can raise the head up, walk the hands in, and as we come to sit, bring the knees back in onto your mat. We now move to another pose where, of course, we're taking the knees wide to bring the length to the groins, but what may be helpful is putting a blanket down for the knees to rest on, because the knees will be out on the floor, and some of us don't have very soft flooring. The blanket can offer padding. Open the blanket considerably. Depending on how wide you think your knees will go when you stretch, you'll need to take the blanket out that wide. I'm going to open my blanket this way and fold it over again. So I've got extra thickness there underneath the knees. Then as I come onto the knees, I'm going to take the knees and the feet out wide, turn the feet out away from each other and slide the knees out as far away from each other as they can. One knee, other knee, one knee, other knee, and then come down onto the forearms. I'm aligning my knees with my hips. I'm not taking the hips too far forward. And I'm also then aligning my ankles with the knees. I'm not bringing the feet in like we had earlier. As you're on the forearms, watch that the lumbar spine isn't collapsing. Can you resist the tendency to collapse here by gently lifting the navel back up towards the spine, lengthening that lumbar region, drawing tailbone down. And you can stay on the forearms, keep the spine parallel to the floor. And this may also provide a feeling of challenge in the hips. As we're getting the stretch in the inner thighs, the hips also may be feeling challenged. No matter what sensation arises, see that you remain steady in your breath. Quieten the facial muscles. And then as you're ready, you can come onto the hands, lift yourself up, perhaps bring the feet in and take the knees in and sit back. Just allowing the groins to rest. We're going to move on using the wall next, and we'll take our mat into the wall, lie with the legs up the wall, then split the legs. We can use this blanket for the head so that you've got a little bit of a pillow underneath the head and the neck. Let's slide the mat in. Make sure you've got enough room on either sides of the mat to be able to split the legs, depending on how much opening you have in the hips and in the inner thighs as to how much room you need. What can also be helpful is using a couple of bricks underneath whether it's the outer thighs or the outer shins or ankles, just to give a sense of whether the legs are moving down the wall evenly. Sometimes we'll find one leg is more willing to descend than the other, and the bricks give us that sense of space. Let's bring them in. Just start with the bricks there on either sides of your mat, and then come to lie down and take your legs up the wall. If you can, bring the buttocks right into the wall and you can support the head with the blanket. Start with the legs together, and then we'll split the legs, slide the heels out wide. Keep the kneecaps and the toes running parallel to the floor rather than letting the legs turn out. Here, the thighs are externally rotating, but actually when I'm taking the legs out wide, I'm not externally rotating the thighs. I'm just going into an abduction. I'm abducting the leg from the center line. Then as I take the legs out, I can use my hands to encourage the thighs out and down as the heels slide down the wall. And then, as I said, the bricks can be used just to give feedback. You can bring them under the same position under each outer thigh. You could even use them as support if you wanted to, if your hips felt uncomfortable. Or you could stand them tall and bring them under each outer knee or outer shin there, just again to give you some feedback. Is the right leg, for example, going lower down the wall than the left leg? And the bricks can tell you that. We stay here for some time, allowing the inner thighs to lengthen, but you press the thighs to the wall. Suction the thighs, so you bring action to the quadriceps. Suction the thighs, back of the thighs to the wall. And perhaps you'd like to bring some more length to the waist and to the side chest. We stretch the arms overhead. If the blanket's too bulky underneath your shoulders, move it up so that it's only underneath the head, and then perhaps the forearms can rest on your blanket. Consciously slow your breath down. Now, before we swap the cross of the forearms, you might find your legs can go a little further. So you can use your arms. I'm going to move my bricks out of the way and shuffle just a little further to the right because the wall's in the way of my left foot going further down. You can use your hands again on the inner legs, encourage those inner legs down, and maybe move the bricks somewhere else so that the bricks are still offering some feedback. And once more, when you lie back, take the arms overhead, but this time swap the cross of the forearms, opposite forearm on top. Go on pressing the thighs to the wall. Broaden the back of the thighs, back of the knees to the wall. Bring more length to your breath, more depth to your breath. Then as you're ready, release the arms from overhead and support your outer legs with your hands. As you bring the legs up, then bend the knees to the chest. The knees can be hip width, but hold your legs with your hands so that the knees don't fall out wide. Contain the knees within your hip width as you let the groins relax. Then when you're ready, roll over and we'll come to sit up. We're still going to use the wall now for a seated variation of that split leg position, and we'll call this Samakonasana, the great angle pose. You can sit up on a blanket if that's helpful. What I find is if students are stiff in the hips or the groins and the hamstrings, they sit with the legs out wide, but the pelvis starts to move into a retroverted position. It's in a posterior tilt, and then the legs turn out. And we don't want that. We want to be able to roll the pelvis forward and keep the kneecaps and the toes facing the ceiling. That's where the height comes in handy. The only thing to consider is now we're wanting the inner feet to come against the wall, and that requires shuffling ourselves in closer and closer to the wall, and we've got to be able to bring the blanket with us. So I'm going to demonstrate without the blanket. I don't find that I need it for this. And I want the inner feet to slide along the wall. And because this section of wall, the cupboards here, are a little bit too narrow for me, I'm going to turn to the other wall. You sit as if you're in Upavishtakonasana. You'll note at the moment my hips are off my mat. I'm bringing my feet towards the inner wall. As I come in closer, I want to bring my hips onto the mat. So I'll shuffle myself in. I'll bring the inner feet to the wall, and I'll keep shuffling myself in as I slide the feet out wider and wider along the wall. Inner feet press away from the groins. Outer feet peel back towards the outer hips. You can use your fingertips on the floor to help yourself sit up. Roll the pelvis forward. Keep the lumbar spine lifted, but also draw the navel up. Then if you can let go the hands on the floor, it might help you to draw the buttock flesh back so that you do stay on the front of the sitting bones. Feel that, and then perhaps you can stretch your arms up the wall. Lean into the wall a little. And as I said, if it feels really difficult, particularly if you're trying to lean forward, but that's challenging, sit up on some height. And breathe smoothly. Slow your breath down. Then you can lower the hands and bring yourself away from the wall. Bring the legs back in together. Now we move away. Well, actually, we don't move away from the wall, but we turn around so that we can use the wall for the buttocks and the back thighs as we attempt the same pose, really, but now we're facing the floor as the legs split out wide. We can bring a bolster in, or a couple of bolsters, or maybe couple of bolsters and some blankets, depending on our flexibility here in the adductor muscles. As I said, you can use one bolster, two bolsters, bolsters and blankets. I'm going to give you an example of working with one bolster and a folded blanket. Now, of course, you could use two bolsters and two folded blankets, but the idea is that potentially you can eliminate one of the props while you're still in the pose. So I'm going to show you that, how I can eliminate the blanket once I'm in the pose. We step the legs wide as if we're going to do Prasarita Padottanasana, but the heels are not touching the wall initially so that we can come forward without falling forward on our head. Once we've got our hands on the floor, then we can step the legs back, bring the heels back to the wall, and you'll note I haven't got the sticky mat under my feet because I actually want to slide the feet. As I slide the feet, I'm going to peel the outer feet up off the floor, peel the outer feet back towards the outer hips. I'll bend the elbows so that I can keep coming down, and I bring the body down onto my support. Forearms can be on the floor depending on how low you are. Now I'm mindful I've got my mic attached to my crop top, so I don't want to muffle the sound by pressing my chest too far down onto the support. Obviously you've got to find the right level of support so that you're not grinning and bearing it and you're not gritting the teeth and grimacing. Use as much height as you need so that you can sustain the pose, using your breath as well to sustain the pose. But what I wanted to show you is if you stay in the pose for a couple of minutes, for example, then you might find that the hips and the legs have got a bit more give, in which case you can eliminate some of the height. You just need to lift yourself up off that height a little bit. So I'm going to lean into one arm, pull the blanket forward so that I can go a little bit lower down onto that bolster. Slide the inner feet away from the groins, peel the outer feet back towards the outer hips, and draw the tailbone down just a little so that I'm not collapsing in the lumbar spine. And we breathe smoothly. Then when you're ready, you can release from the pose by sliding forward. So push your bolster back to the wall as you slide forward off your bolster, bring the legs in closer, and then you can come up and just sit, find neutral so that the inner thighs can rest. Of course, there are numerous poses that we can practice that will bring length to the adductor muscles, the inner thighs, but these were just some that I thought to share with you today. If you enjoy practicing with me, I invite you to check out the video library on my website, heatherkitchenyoga.com.au. I'll put the link in the description box below. In that library, there are over 450 full-length classes, and I add a new class every week. I invite you to subscribe with a 7-day free trial. That's it for today. Thanks for joining me. For more in-depth teaching, check out the video library on my website, heatherkitchenyoga.com.au. The link is in the description box below.